joined us, say hi to us in the Q&A box and tell us where you're from. We'd love to hear from you and know who our audience is today. If you do ask questions, just to make you aware that there is a slight delay from us to you of about 20 seconds. So that's great. We've got some comments coming in to say hi and that you can hear us, so we will make a start. My name is Kellyanne Perry and I'm the Practice Improvement Lead for Warsaw Safeguarding Partnership. We're all living in quite difficult times at the moment, and we've all had to make some significant changes, I suppose, to the way that we live and how we do our job when we're working with adults, children and their families. One of our key priorities in Walsall is neglect. We meet as partners at the Neglect Steering Group quite frequently, and there is lots of work happening behind the scenes around neglect across the partnership, and we wanted to take some time today to talk to you about what it is that's happening in Walsall around neglect and to share that with you. So it's lovely to see so many people on this webinar today from lots of different agencies. It's all coming through now. And we currently have about 75 attendees with us, which is brilliant, and it's fantastic to have you all with us, and that number keeps popping, keeps going up, which is great. So what we're going to do in the next hour and a half is to think about how we can support children and young people who are being neglected, and to get that better understanding of what different services are out there, what tools we have to help frontline practitioners to identify neglect. And it's really important to say that even though we will tell you the definition of neglect as part of the webinar and what to look out for, this isn't training on neglect. We do offer free training to all partners, and that can be found on the Warsaw Safeguarding Partnership website, which I will share with you at the end of the webinar. So today we have quite a few guest speakers from across the partnership who are really excited to be here with you today to speak to you about their services and what they are doing around neglect. So today you're going to hear from Ali Sultana, who is the local campaigns manager for the Nspcc, who will start our webinar today looking at the national picture around neglect. We will then hear what's going on in Warsaw more and seeing what we're doing locally. So we'll hear from Beverly Bailey, who's from Elmwood Primary, and Nick Tuck from Colmore Primary Academy, who are here today to represent all Warsaw schools. We've got Trevine Molyneux, who is the clinical team leader for school nursing, Joy Jackson Jeffries, he is the safeguarding supervisor for the health visiting team. Got Georgina Atkins, who is parenting lead for early help, and finally we'll be hearing from Jane Edwards, who is project support manager, who works alongside our neglect champions. So as you can see, we've got quite a jam-packed webinar. There's lots of slides to get through, and after the webinar is over, I will be sending out all the presentations over to you along with an evaluation form. We also have with us today Kerry Lister, who is supporting us with all the technical side of the webinar, and she'll be moving the slides on and controlling the presentation for us today. So we're hoping by the end of the session that you feel equipped with the right information to help spread the key messages, and you've had some time to reflect within your role and maybe within your community around people that need some additional support and where you can access that support from. So just before I hand over to Ali, even though we can't see you or hear you today, you can interact with us on the live question and answer box. And what we'll do is we'll pick up all of the questions at the very end of the webinar. So if you can pop all your questions in there, I'll collate them and then we can go to the individual people to answer those questions for you. We'll also be popping links into that as well as we're going along today. If something is spoken about and it's accessible on the internet, I will pop that link in the box for you so you'll be able to access that later on as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Ali Sultana from the Nspcc. So welcome, Ali.
Thanks, Kellyanne. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, I've seen your nod, so that's wonderful. So hi everybody, good morning. I'm from the Nspcc where I work as the local campaigns manager, and today we just want to take you through my slides, which is kind of giving you kind of the overall picture of neglect nationally and the types of things that we're doing to help reduce neglect as well on a national and local level. So I look forward to your questions a bit later on, and I'm guessing that you can see the slides as well. So I can't at the moment. Bear with me. I can see my slides, but I can't see what's on the screen for some reason. Yes, I see it now. Bear with me. Okay, if you can have the next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, it's not. Bear with me, I can't see it properly. It's typical, isn't it? I've been in the call for half an hour now, everything's fine, and now it just goes a bit funny. Okay, rightio. So the working definition of neglect is the persistent failure, and what we've done is underlined that the persistent failure to meet a child's basic physical and psychological needs. So I won't go over this in lots of detail. Some of you have probably been through this already. So once a child is born, neglect may involve the parent or carer failing to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, including exclusion from home or abandonment, to protect a child from physical and emotional harm or danger, ensure that adequate supervision is provided. So, for example, getting a 5-year-old to take care of a 2-year-old while they pop out somewhere. Ensure that access to appropriate medical care or treatment, and failing to provide unresponsiveness to basic emotional needs as well. So next slide for me. Thank you. So in some ways we understand that it can be quite challenging sometimes for professionals to understand or even respond to neglect and know when it's happening. So it's important that we do identify it, but neglect as a basis for intervention is complex. We understand that, and it can be difficult to define sometimes. Okay, next slide. The types of neglect are listed here. So we have physical neglect, medical neglect, education, failure to provide educational, attend school, and emotional. So the kind of unresponsiveness and lack of attention and taking care of child's emotional needs is another type of neglect as well. Next slide, please. So what we've done here is kind of put them into 2 different categories. You've got your physical neglect and the types of behaviours or the lack of behaviours that relate to that. And then you've got the emotional neglect as well, and the types of behaviours or the lack of behaviour to relate to emotional neglect as well. So I'll just give you a second to read that. So we do know that emotional abuse is increasing as the reason for children to be on child protection plans or the register in England and Wales as well. There's a really good video that I want to show you on the next slide called Michelle's Story. On the next slide. Yeah, so Michelle's Story you can easily find on YouTube. The video is only about 7 minutes long, but I didn't have time to show you today. What I would do is certainly send you the link on that through the chat and suggest that you watch it. It's a really good kind of animated video that's really insightful as to how neglect happens and how subtle it can be at the very beginning and how it evolves. It's all from a young person's perspective, which I always find helpful, so I'll send you the link on that. Next slide. So neglect is all about the nots, really, and this I find quite helpful. So it's not having adequate quality or quality of food or quantity of food. It's not being safe and warm, having a clean place to live or sleep or play in. It's not having access to doctor, someone having to take to the doctor or dentist or optician. It's not being taken to school, disciplined and praised. It's not being washed, having clean clothes to fit, or having a toothbrush to clean your teeth with. And it's not being loved. And the next slide, I think, demonstrates that quite well. And it shows how big the issue is and how we call him Bob, and he's got, you know, more than one knot, and it's all about how many knots can Bob carry before it becomes overwhelming. The next slide, I wanted to share with you some stats really on the national picture. We all know, or we may know, that neglect is the most common reason for children being on the Child Protection Plan. At the Nspcc, and these are the latest figures from 2018 and 19, the Nspcc helpline handled nearly 12,708 contacts from people who are worried about children being neglected. That's quite a few, and this is just people in the community who might have recognised or been concerned about some of the symptoms of neglect. Also, if you look at that particular slide, it gives you information on the police figures as well. So if you're looking at the same year, there's over 18,000 cases of parents deliberately neglecting or mistreating or assaulting their children, and this number has doubled over the last 5 years. Again, at the Nspcc, I would say a third of all the calls to the helpline are about neglect, unfortunately. Okay, so that's a bit of the national picture. And then we come onto the slides. What's happening during lockdown? Certainly over the last few months, we have had many contacts to the helpline over the 3-month kind of lockdown period, really. We received over 22,000 contacts from people just over that 3-month period. And this was, you know, it could be due to a number of reasons, including increasing parental and family stress, reduction in the services that are on offer or we even have access to, and of course the intensity of all the pressures that children are probably dealing with anyway, adults are dealing with, that have kind of increased over that period. We would say that over 40% of those contacts that we received, we had to refer on to the police and other services for further action, because we're deemed to be serious. Okay, next slide, please. Causes and risks for neglect. We know that adults who simply do not understand the needs of their children, including those with learning difficulties or disabilities, may neglect their children. Parental history of neglect and abuse may be another factor, as well as mental health issues, misuse of drugs, personality disorders, mental health issues, domestic abuse, as well as we know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds and poor backgrounds might be more likely to be at risk of neglect, not because that might be intentional, because it could be, for example, parents might need to go out and work 2 or 3 jobs just to meet their needs and put food on the table. So it's quite complex. We know that poverty is not a predictor of neglect, but we do know that it can affect children. They do come from poorer backgrounds because of all the reasons I've outlined. Next slide. Professor David Hull tells us that neglect is an insidious form of maltreatment. It starves the developing mind of stimulation. It denies the child information and interest about self and others. So it's not just, you know, child turning up for school with, you know, dirty clothes on, and if we just put some, you know, clean clothes on them and whatnot, it will get better. It's about the long-term effects of that neglect and that lack of kind of stimulation and neglect, really, that will have a long-term effect on that child's brain. So neglect impacts children in lots of different ways. It can impact on their bodies, their physical bodies. It can impact on their learning, their brains, their emotions, and also it affects their neural pathways as well. So there's lots of science behind this as well that gives us lots of evidence to tell us that neglect isn't just something they can get over. It is very damaging to their childhoods, but also their adult lives as well. So neglect for the next slide does happen to children older as well. So it doesn't just happen to small children. It can just display itself differently with older children. So with older children, you might find that they show signs and symptoms of depression, mental health issues. They might be abusing drugs and alcohol. They might be involved in early sexual activity. They might be achieving lower grades at school, as well as other kind of behaviours such as antisocial behaviours. They might display itself differently. Research tells us that over 18% of 11 to 17-year-olds have experienced some type of severe maltreatment. And they don't always receive the same amount of kind of attention as well, especially with emotional neglect. Teenagers sometimes kind of blame their own behaviour as well, and kind of don't understand or see that it's to do with the kind of neglect. It could be because I'm not doing well at school because I'm stupid, or I don't know what I'm doing. If they don't see it as a consequence of neglect, but we do know that it has a severe impact on their mental health. They can become self-destructive or show signs of aggression and kind of acting out behaviours as well. So it's not important that it's important that we just don't focus on these behaviours, but we look to the cause of why this is happening. Sometimes what we find as well is that children could be caregivers to adults too, and as a result of that, they can be neglected in a number of ways. Okay. The next slide here is taken from the Children's Society, and this demonstrates that there's a difference in the risk-taking behaviours for children who have been neglected and those who haven't and who have been supported. So you'll see here the red bar is for emotionally neglected children. It shows their risk-taking behaviour is certainly increased if they have been neglected. So when it comes down to kind of parenting, whether they smoke or not, or whether they're drinking alcohol quite early on, there's certainly a connection between that and neglect. Certainly at Childline, for the next slide, we do have support for young people. We talk to young people all day, every day, and certainly there has been a huge increase in the number of young people that have called us, particularly during the lockdown period. In April, it was our very busiest month ever, really, at Childline. Young people called us about all sorts of issues, feeling isolated, being at home, where they don't feel they're being cared for, their needs are not being met, and certainly we're hoping to respond to that. We do have a campaign around neglect for young people. We have resources for young people as well that they can certainly access through the Childline website and apps, something called Feeling Invisible, which is certainly a support and a resource for young people as well. And it is up to everybody to play a role. We want children to feel safe. We want them to feel safe to tell their story. We want them to feel heard, and in a timely manner. We want to focus on the cause of any kind of changes in behaviour rather than the symptoms of that. We want parents and carers to be knowledgeable of how their behaviour may impact on their child. We do have services for parents. One is called Building Blocks, the other one's called Parents Under Pressure, to help them understand what some of this behaviour might be and how it impacts on their child, and help to kind of change that and adapt that behaviour. We do need the community to be involved as well, so we don't want the kind of fatalist approach and thought process where it's going to happen anyway. We want them to be involved. We want them to understand that they can, working together, we can all prevent neglect, and to take action and to report it if they see it, they have an inkling that something could be wrong. And of course, we want universal services to really listen to children and to be alerted early when they know of the symptoms and consider what direct support could be offered to prevention of those problems and that behaviour. And not always be the first resort, really. We want, there's lots of tools and resources for parents and for professionals out there they can access us, but sometimes it's about knowing about those tools and resources, and that's what we hope to do through particular campaigns that we want to deliver. So the next slide here will display a poster, yeah, on the right hand side, and that poster is something that we've used previously in other campaigns to highlight what neglect is. So Oliver's mum is still in the pub and Oliver is home alone. He's only 8 years old. So these are some of the posters that we use alongside lots of other communication and materials to help communities to understand what neglect is, but also working with professionals to understand what neglect is and where they can go for help and learn more about it. There's certainly lots of information that they can find, that you can find online on the Nspcc website. There's e-learning that you can access, and also podcasts as well that we do produce on a regular basis. We do have a campaign plan for Walsall now, looking at the issue of neglect. The campaign will be called Neglect Matters, and this will involve lots of activity within the community, as well as posters, working with professionals, training sessions to help fill in any gaps that might be present. At the moment, we do have a campaign running that's called Look, Say, Sing, Play. Some of you may have heard of it already. It's all backed by brain science, and it's about the bonding of parents and small children to help build their brains and reduce neglect by building stronger bonds between parent and child. And of course, there's lots of people that you can go to locally as well if you want to know more. Certainly, I think this webinar is a really good idea to help keep the issue of neglect on the agenda and the forefront of everybody's minds. But certainly, if you have any more questions about the presentation today, then I'm happy to share my email address and forward any links that might be of help.
Thank you very much, Ali. I have dropped a couple of the links into the Q&A box. I've dropped the link in for the video and also the Nspcc website. So please, all, if you know, at the end of this webinar, you can make yourself familiar with those as well. The posters that Ali made reference to, we do have, obviously they're back in the office, so they're not accessible at the moment, but we do have a lots of those posters that we've already sent out, and they're to go into public domain. So it's not kind of to put in staff rooms and things like that, but if you do have waiting areas in your facilities, it's just to kind of start to put the message out there. So if you haven't had sight of these posters and you do want some, please drop your information in the chat, or you've all got my direct email address, and I'll make sure that as and when we are back in the office that we're able to potentially get some of those out to you. Okay, so thank you very much, Ali, for that. I also didn't say on there as well that unfortunately you can't see everybody's faces today because some people haven't got the technology where we can see faces, and we've had to dial some people into calls. But where people have got their cameras on, then we will make sure that you can see their faces as well, so we can put a face to a name. So I believe Beverly has got a camera function today, so I'll now hand over to Beverly and then to Nick Tuck, who are going to take us through some case studies of what they see in their schools around neglect and the work that all schools across Warsaw and in the education system are doing to support these families. So over to you, Beverly. Thank you. Beverly, sorry, you've got your mic on. Can you take your mic off?
Can you hear me?
We can now, thank you.
Perfect. Just a slight correction, we're actually a secondary school, so I am from a school for social, emotional, mental health difficulties. If you go on to the next slide, please. So I just want to kind of have something for you to think about, really. I'm going to run through two case studies. So the very first one is this neglect. Pupil has head lice for the 4th time within a 7-week time frame. Next slide, please. What do we know about this pupil? We know that there's low cognition with the parent, and we know that because we've had a recent assessment completed. There are also 3 children with a diagnosed disability living within that household. We know that the household do rely on a family member, which is grandma, to support the family, and grandma supports with domestic duties and children's personal hygiene. We know that the family are a low-income family, and we do know that the parent requires all 3 siblings to be in school in order to do their job. Next slide, please. What's changed? Now, thinking about lockdown, things are different, and it has been different for our families. So we know that the actual grandparent who supports the family is currently shielding. They have been shielding since early March. We know that 2 children are already at home. We know that the parent wants the 3rd child from our school to actually be at home as well, because they are worried and do have concerns around the pandemic. We know that the parent's income has stopped because, as I said prior, the parent needs the children to be in school in order to carry out the work. Next slide, please. So in terms of that, with all that in mind, we're actually looking at a solution. So we need the parent to return the child to school. We obviously share with the parent about our pod system, our bubble system, and that allows the child and the parent to feel safe in school, and that allows for a safe return. With parents' permission, we actually treat the head lice in school. But what we also do is we talk to that parent and we talk to the child, and we ensure that someone who the child's got a good relationship in school is the member of staff who is treating the head lice. We also ensure that the pupil receives regular treatment, so that involves combing. We did have to treat several times over the next couple of weeks. Pupil is also given a self-care kit to take home. Parent has been informed. What we need to do is build those skills up for the child, so they know how to manage their own head lice. We know that it's really hard for the parent to understand how to do that, so it's important that we transfer those skills to that child. The pupil, we hope, will remember the process, and this will prevent the continuing cycle of the neglect in the future. So that's one case study. Next slide, please. And again, is this neglect? We know that a pupil's uniform is too small. Trousers are noticeably too short. Pupil has no school shoes, and during the pandemic, the family do not have enough food to eat. Next slide, please. So again, what do we know about the family? Because it's important that we know lots of information about our family to put the correct support in place. We know again that the family are low income. We know that for this young person, attendance is really good. Uniform, we also know, is essential, so the child feels part of the school community. It also prevents pressure from peers, why are your trousers too short, and all those sort of questions. We know that the parent has a learning difficulty. They also have a medical condition and has recently given birth to another child. Because of the medical condition, we know that the parent is shielding, and also for the time we've known the family, they are open and honest with professionals. Next slide, please. So again, what is our solution? We purchased a school uniform, including school shoes and trainers. We do that from school fund. Now, pupils contribute to the school fund by providing charity events throughout the year, and we just make sure that we're giving that back to the children when need. We know that once we've that solution has been sorted, the pupil is proud, their self-esteem is still high, it's not impacting because they feel part of the Elmwood community. During the pandemic, we know that the parents shielding, all siblings have been at home. So what we've made sure that we've done is when we deliver free school meals for our young person, we've also put extra free school meals because they're only sandwiches in a pot, in a bag. So that goes for all the siblings. Because the family has low cognition and they do not have the internet, when it went over to free school meal vouchers, we also ensured for all of our families that we print off those vouchers and we take them to the family home. If we're waiting for the parent to print that off, we know that they're going to be struggling and they're not going to get the timely need the food when they need it, right help, right time. What I also did is made sure that I contacted the Trussell Trust and arranged for free school meals, food parcels to actually go to the family home. I know that the parent was not able to do that, so that was important. So thinking about the bigger picture, yes, to some extent, the headlights, that is neglect, but we can actually manage that. If we'd filled out an early help assessment, that would have been way too long for the parents to have the right support at the right time. We know once the pandemic's over, we know that the families will return back to normal, and really, you know, the children are happy. We continue our visits. It's nice to have them in school, and you know, that's helped us and the families. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Beverly. I'm going to hand you straight over to Nick Tuck, who will continue kind of looking at case studies and just that food for thought for all of you, because this isn't unique to these two schools. This is happening, and the support is happening across all schools and education facilities in Walsall. So Nick, over to you, who's going to just have a look at that circumstantial neglect.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Nick. I'm Safeguarding Manager at Karma Primary Academy in Warsaw. Next slide, please. So a lot of our families that we deal with actually have quite a limited access to public recourse and funding. So my experience of neglect are changing week on week. We're seeing an increase in those cases that are due to funds being provided by the state. A lot of our families are either entitled to benefits or funds from the government, such as universal credit or asylum seeking benefits from the Home Office. We're seeing that the funding provided can often be tight when our families are budgeting, and this can lead to various aspects of their lives being neglected. So it's there where we step in to support and explore their needs, and then either signpost or refer for additional support if we can't manage it in school. Next slide, please. So again, if families tell us that they feel they're entitled to more funding, then we advise them to seek that support or guidance from Walsall Council. It's not our place to advise them or get caught up in conversations around that. Our issues that we tend to see are from this limited access, and this causes issues more around food and clothing are our most common issues, but aren't limited to those either. Post-lockdown, we've supported a lot of families since returning to school with these circumstantial neglect issues, and we're expecting this to continue to rise as we progress into the school year. Next slide, please. So this is a case study for one of our families. They've recently arrived in the UK. They've got no contacts whatsoever and have got an extremely limited English and literacy skills. They've managed to apply to a school place, and then they were offered a place at Karma. Parent talks to our community for support, as she's got nothing. The community have then decided that they are going to involve school. When we became involved, Mum said that she had no money and could barely afford food and struggled to supply school uniform. When school explored her financial concerns a little bit more, we found that she had about £1.74 left a week after she paid rent, bills and brought food. When we looked at food, breakfast, lunch and dinner often consisted of mainly rice and possibly any spices which you could add to that for that week. Next slide, please. So on this one, this is what we did. We approached Tesco, who reached out to the community, and they managed to provide uniform, shoes and a winter coat at no cost to the family or school. We engaged a Bengali speaking member of staff with the parents and helped complete the benefit applications. We engaged Bengali speaking parents as well, who gladly took the family to Walsall Council to sit with them and help with any translations and interpretations that were needed. And this developed into quite a nice support network as well for this family. School provided lunch free of charge while free school meals eligibility was obtained, and then the family received everything they were entitled to. and are now able to be self-sufficient and receive no further support from the school, the council or the community. Next slide, please. So this is how we help. So we like to team up with many different people within our wider community as well as the school community to support our families depending on what their needs are. Our overall aim is to empower our families in becoming self-sufficient and not disempowering them by doing everything for them. School funding, we know money's tight in schools as it is everywhere. However, just asking the question, sometimes you may be able to provide some support from a school to our most vulnerable families. Donations as well. Uniform and clothing donation requests sent out to parents can be a great way to acquire second-hand clothing, but due to the current circumstance, I don't know what everyone's risk assessments look like, so that's worth checking as well. Next slide, please. Post-lockdown, pupils are added to our vulnerable list in readiness for our keep in touch calls in case of partial closure or lockdown again. This enables us to continue to offer support and signpost services that are still running. If a family or pupil is unable to meet our academy or school expectations, such as uniform, then reasonable short-term adjustments are made to prevent this non-attendance. You know, we need to keep them in school where possible. And then, as per Keeping Children Safe 2020, our children that we identify as vulnerable are routinely discussed as a standalone group in our pupil progress meetings with teachers and support staff. This ensures that neglect or other vulnerabilities aren't encroaching on their attainment potential. Again, adjustments and further interventions may be identified and put in place at this point. Next slide, please. We engage, like I said, with local charities and organisations. It does sometimes just involve ringing around and see what they can support with. They may provide uniform budgets or food tokens, vouchers for food banks. There's a link there to Walsall's website for charities. Both use Tesco and Asda community champions in the past. We've managed to get them to reach out and see what support they can offer and the communities linked with them offer. Tesco managed to raise enough money to purchase a uniform for several of our most vulnerable families, and this is brilliant because they've got that wider community reach, and there's 2 links there for their contact details. And the next page, please. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I have added all those links on for people because I think it's really useful to share information as to where else we can access, because I think sometimes we always think that we have to go to kind of statutory services, and I think it's really useful to know where we can actually access in the community and the voluntary organisations as well. So I've popped all of those links in the chat for you. So thank you very much to Bev and to Nick for kind of really giving it that to bring sort of it alive and neglect. And when we talk about neglect, we're not always talking about those really chronic neglect cases. It's about that early identification of neglect and what support we can put in place to ensure that it doesn't escalate. So we're having to make referrals under child protection and things like that. So thank you for kind of really bringing that to life for us. And I know there's so many examples across all schools and all agencies, and they were just sort of a few of what we're seeing in Warsaw at the moment. So thank you both very much. And as part of that early identification of neglect, there is support from health professionals that are community based as well. So we've invited the school nursing service and the health visiting service, who offer lots of early help support for vulnerable families. So I'm going to hand you over to Trevina, who's going to talk about the school nursing and what they have to offer. So hi, Trevina.
Hello. As I was introduced, I'm the school nursing clinical team leader. We work with children within Walsall, whether at school, educated at home or at college, asylum seekers, anybody really, any children we would work with and their families. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so how do we work with children and families around neglect? We're all, the school nurses are all qualified nurses, have worked in hospitals, whether it be with children or adults. There's a combination of both. We continue to have mandatory safeguarding training as well as additional training. A lot of us have done the Nspcc supervisor training as well, the safeguarding. We offer holistic health assessments for children and young people, so that's looking at both their physical health and their emotional health. We do deliver a number of workshops as well, which is looking at that early start of things for parents. So we offer behaviour workshops, emotional health workshops, toilet training and healthy lifestyles, as well as a number of others. Those are for parents. And then for children, we offer the Friends programme, which is for children with low self-esteem and anxiety, and also parenting as a course, Triple P. And we also offer Signet Parenting, which is for children with autism, and that's for the parents around behaviour. So young people as well, we have a texting service which is called Chat Health, and any children can, from the age of, from year 6 onwards, can text in. I'm trying to think of the word then. They can text into that website, that number, and it's all confidential and anonymous. We also have a parent one as well, where they can text in, and they are used really well, mainly for secondary school children and for parents that just want a bit more information. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, we also offer a single point of access every day, and we've offered this through COVID as well. So it's manned from 9 till 5. We usually have 2 duty nurses on that. So if any professionals, parents phone up, they can actually speak to a duty nurse. At the moment, we're actually putting 3 nurses on because we're getting a lot of phone calls as well from schools around COVID as well. So we're trying to still look at the general referrals that are coming in from schools, professionals or parents, but also queries from school around the COVID, and working closely with public health. We do have a referral system, so if a professional did phone in, we'd be asking them to complete a referral form. That's for our data so that we can capture all the information. If a parent calls in, obviously we'd sit and do the referral form with them and give them advice and support. And again, I've just spoken about Chat Health. So that's for young people, year 6 and up. We do actually go out to secondary schools and do Chat Health assemblies where they're all given an individual card as well with the phone numbers on. Next slide, please. Okay, so how we've continued through COVID as well. We're continuing to contribute to the child protection process. So I'm sure you're all aware that has been virtual at the moment. I think at the start of COVID, you know, we had a few issues, technical issues, but I think we seem to have resolved all those now, and conferences and early help and child in need meetings are still going ahead virtually, and they're working very well. We are looking to use more virtual deliveries as well. We've been doing workshops virtually as well. So post-lockdown, we've now started to offer some face-to-face appointments. We've started to go back into some schools, and clients are now, well, not clients, sorry, children and young people and their parents are now coming into the health centre as well to be seen. We're still using COVID restrictions, but it seems to be working really well. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are just, when you get the PowerPoint, there's just a couple of links on here. So it talks about the single point of access, again, being 9 to 5 for all professionals that can gain support and advice. There's also the referral form that you can link into there. Social workers, if they wanted lateral checks to be done for young people, there is a specific form. And school nurses, we have all got our own schools. We work corporately, so any school nurse could see any child, but we do have a linked school nurse to each school, so they're there to give support and advice throughout the year. So if there's any additional support or workshops that we've got going on, or information that we can provide you, that will be sent out by email to the school. Next slide. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Trevine. I'm going to just carry that on then and invite Joy to talk to us now about the health visiting and neglect. So, hi, Joy.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hello? Okay,
we can.
Good. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name's Joy Jackson-Jeffers. I am one of the safeguarding supervisor for health visiting. I commenced in Walsall Trust on the 1st of July. So next slide, please. So safeguarding and child protection are core activities of health visiting, and health visitors are well placed to undertake this role. Definition of safeguarding provided in statutory guidance embraces one of our core values of prevention, provision of safe and effective care, and in enabling all children to have the best possible outcomes. Prevention is of course the key. The advice that we give is to support, signpost and information giving that we routinely do on a daily basis. And hopefully these have an impact on reducing the risk to infants and young children. So according to the Healthy Child Programme, we deliver 5 mandatory contacts. So we do antenatal contacts. Those are between 28 to 36 weeks. We do new birth visits. So between 10 to 14 days, we will carry out a new birth visit to the home. 6 to 8 weeks, we do another contact. 9 to 12 months, and the 2 to 2.5 year check. We offer high level of training to all our health visitors on aspects of safeguarding, holistic assessments, and one-to-one visits to the home. Next slide, please. Don't know where I am now. So health visitors have universal contact with families and are therefore often the first point of contact to families, and more importantly, the advocate for the child. And this provides open access for all. So we have what we call, again, as a health visiting service, as the school nurses do, a single point of access which operates between 9 to 5 each day. And in the admin hub, we have a health visitor and a nursery nurse that is present. So for referrals that come in from parents for advice, for signposting, or from social workers to give to do lateral checks. Health visitors give advice, support, signposts, holistic assessments, which will then include timely referrals to the relevant services to prevent circumstances from deteriorating. We also work in partnership with social workers and other professionals and agencies that are involved in keeping the children safe and well. Next slide, please. I don't know where I am. So prevention is always the key, and it's, as I said before, it's part of our outcomes for our activities that we undertake. Post-lockdown then, or what's happened during lockdown, we've continued the safeguarding service and health visiting. We've offered virtual contacts to families. If mom has concerns around a child, we're unable to see them, so we've got a system in place that we can actually get them to call into us and send a picture, and we can then have a conversation with mom around the issues or the concerns. So we've moved to a virtual delivery of interventions. We haven't been doing baby clinics because, again, that accumulates lots of families coming in, and because of the COVID-19 guidelines, we want to stay safe and distance. So post-lockdown, what we've done now is that we are going out on a need to know, or whatever the case is, if it's an extreme for our child protection or our child in need, we are going out and giving those kind of interaction with families again, but we still continue to do mostly telephone and virtual contact at the moment. So we continue to contribute to the child protection processes. So we do referral into the local authority if we have concerns, and we work with social workers. We do joint visits when it's safe to do so. And we continue to do socially distanced working. So there's been a lot of adaptation that we've had to do to continue the service. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for telling us kind of what health still have to offer. I've popped the links in there to access the health visiting website and the email address that you can use if you need to. There was a phone number on there as well, which I will send these slides out to everybody, so you'll be able to see that single point of contact for the phone number as well on that slide. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much both. So neglect at times can be really difficult to identify. And therefore in Warsaw we use the Grady Care Profile 2 tool. This is an evidence-based assessment and that can support in the identification of neglect. So today we've got Georgina Atkins with us, who is one of our trainers for Grady Care Profile 2 in Warsaw, and she's going to tell us more about how to use this tool. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box as well, especially while George is talking, because I'm sure the Grady Care Profile 2 will generate some of those questions and we'll be able to answer those at the end of the presentation. So thank you. So George, over to you.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Can you hear me all okay?
We can.
Oh, super duper. Welcome everybody. My name is Georgina Atkins. I'm the parenting lead in the early help service as part of Children's Services. And like Kellyanne says, I'm also a Grady Care Profile 2 trainer, or GCP2 for short. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes chatting to you a little bit about the Grady Care Profile 2 training and the assessment tool. So do you want to slide on for me? So why do we need a separate assessment for neglect in the GCP2, which I know is a question many of you are thinking. You know, we've already talked about like health visitors assessments and school nursing assessments and early help assessments through this presentation today. But we do need a specific tool that purely focuses on neglect for a number of reasons, really. So assessing neglect can be difficult. Neglect is often not a static thing. It often goes up and down. It can get better when we're involved with families, or when professionals are involved with families, and then when we step away, things can get worse again, really. It can be subjective and prone to bias, neglect can. So what I might think is good enough home conditions, somebody else might think that that's not good enough home conditions. And I think there can be a bit of a general apathy, oh, it's just Walsall parents, you know, this is as good as we're going to get out of Walsall parents when we're thinking about neglect. And that's just so not right, really. So it is something that we do have to challenge, and it is something that the GCP2 can really help with, really. There's a really high threshold recognition for neglect as well, unlike like physical abuse, where we can see something, it is difficult to see. The effects of neglect could be a long-term effect, not something that's kind of immediate, really. It can be difficult to capture and compare for those reasons as well. And it can also be complex and intergenerational. So parents as children can grow up experiencing substandard parenting or neglectful parenting, and that becomes internalized and it becomes the norm. And unless, you know, you stop and reflect as parents, often we're just kind of like following that tradition on, aren't we, really? So even when we work with parents, you know, there can be a sense of, oh, they're just on my back, you know, I just need to do this while we're involved. I need to get a bit better in these areas while they're involved, and then I can go back as soon as they step out of our family. So yeah, you know, there is a whole number of reasons really why we kind of like do need to look at having a specific assessment tool for neglect. So if you could slide on for me. Okay, so what is the Grady Care Profile 2 tool? It's a specific assessment that looks at the the net care being delivered to the child. What is life actually like for that child? It is an evidence-based assessment tool, which means it has been tried and tested up and down the country to ensure its effectiveness. And what happens is it breaks care down that's a parent is undertaking for a child, and it gives that care, that behaviour, a score of 1 best to 5 worst. Any of you out there that are outcome start trained will know that that's the other way round. So it is something we have to bear in mind, because it's, you know, 5 best and 1 worst on the outcome star levels. But yes, you do give parents a score of 1 best to you know, moving up to 5 really, which is the worst aspects of care being that child is being afforded really. It is also color coded, so it's not about a 1, 2, 3, 4. It uses a traffic light system of green to oranges to reds. And it's a theoretically sound tool, so it brings in lots of different theories. Maslow's hierarchy of needs there, which I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with, amongst other different developmental theories, to build its kind of like evidence base really. It's a really good tool for identifying strengths as well as weaknesses. So this is not about jumping on parents and going, right, okay, you're worse at this, you're worse at that. It looks at what's going good for parents as well. I think that's a place we can get to as professionals when we're looking at things like neglect, because we can often be involved with a family and we think, oh, you know, I'm really worried about this aspect of care that this child is receiving, but this is really good. The parent's really good at that. So does that outweigh that? You know, does that counteract what I'm really worried about? So you can really get in that place of being quite confused around neglect really. So this is what the tool does. It identifies what are strengths, but also what are weaknesses. What is it we need to be looking at changing for this child to have the best outcomes. So it does target the aspects of neglectful care really. And it provides evidence that can then inform your intervention plans. So instead of getting in that place about weighing things up, you can actually target what your intervention needs to look like around those areas of weakness, really. And if you could slide on for me. So this is just a real quick snapshot of what the Grady Care Profile 2 tool does. It looks at 4 different areas of care being afforded to a child, and it's not looking at, you know, why these things are happening. It is just actually what is life like for this child. You know, what is it like on a day-to-day basis, the care that this parent is delivering to this child. It also looks at the parent's motivation to provide that care as well. So it's never kind of taking into consideration the big things, you know, like, is this because of parents' mental health? Is it because of parental substances use? It just kind of like leaves that out of it. It's just looking at what care is actually like for this child. So it looks at these 4 different areas: physical, safety, emotional, and development. Some of you are probably noticing, you know, my reference to Maslow here, where Maslow talked about love. The Nspcc have replaced this for emotional care. So within these different areas, there's then different subdomains. So you'll see within the physical area, for example, you've got nutrition, housing, clothing, hygiene, health. Now behind each of those subdomains is an evidence category. So it's not about me just going out and going, right, okay, I'm looking at this housing situation and I think it's a 1, or I think it's a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5. It's about me as a practitioner then matching that to the actual evidence that is produced within the Grady Care Profile 2 tool. So in order to give a parent a score like that, you have to have matched the evidence. we've talked about this being a strengths-based form as well. Parents can see this. We can give parents the tool. They can see these aspects of care and how we undertake this measure of care. Young people, to a certain extent, can also be very much involved in the process, having a copy of the tool and looking at the aspects of care that they're receiving as well. So overall, the Grady Care will then give you a specific score of 1 being best and 5 being worst in all those different areas and all those different subdomains. So what happens then is you can start to target your intervention plans around the areas of care that we're concerned about, those 4 and 5 areas of care. Okay, you can tab on for me. So when would you use the Grady Care Profile 2 tool? And I know not all of you are going to think, oh, you know, I definitely need to get on this training and have more information about the GCP2. You might just be part of it as part of feeding into like a Grady Care Profile 2 report. But, you know, it's a very versatile tool. It can be used where neglect is suspected, but however, we kind of use it in early help as well when we're finding that we're really not getting to the bottom of what, you know, this child's life is like and what the everyday care is of this child. So we might kind of like not specifically suspect neglect, but we need more information. So we might do a Grady Care Profile 2 tool then. But it does assess the current quality of care and it gives you a baseline measure. So it gives you a moment in time of what care is actually like for that child, with the idea that you can then measure again at another moment in time so that you can start to see if things have improved or got worse. So that's how it monitors progress, really. And it can really ensure that your interventions are targeted. So instead of us going in, you know, just thinking, all right, okay, this and this for the family, you know, it actually shows us the specific areas we need to be working on to ensure that the care is improved for that child. You can slide on for me, please. I've just got a short video for you to watch now. This is something that's been produced by the Nspcc, and it's a professional's experience of undertaking the Grady Care Profile 2 tool. So I'll let you girls do what you need to do to press go on that.
I'm Sue Evans. I'm a nursery manager and I've been doing that job for about 28 years.
My name is Carl Harris. I'm a training and development consultant at the Nspcc and I've now been working for the organisation for 5 years. GCP2 is a neglect assessment tool and a simple tool that can be used by a whole range of professionals across social care. The whole purpose is to measure the quality of care so we can give families the support they need.
I think what's unique about GCP2 is the actual look of the framework, the documents. It's not scary, it's colourful, it's very simple to follow, and you can actually use it in partnership with the families. Because we work very closely with families, we're often the first port of call. We notice when there's a family's in crisis. I initially found out that there was a problem from a telephone call from another agency. The family consisted of very young parents living in a high-rise flat and both unemployed with 2 children. I think the stress that they were under then started to really grate. Mum was quite depressed. There was some low-level domestic violence and police had been called to the property. There was also a young baby, I think 6 months at the time. And the baby was becoming ill on a regular basis, had sort of breathing difficulties, constantly getting chest infections, and the lack of attending medical appointments with the baby. On my first visit to the home, I was immediately concerned because the entrance hall that I was invited into had got broken furniture. She'd got a 2-year-old that was obviously toddling around, running around. That was the first concern that hit me. I felt that using the GCP2 tool would be a good way of supporting Mum to evaluate where she was at and to actually give her a real objective visual of what the expected outcomes were for those children. So that's what we did. We worked together initially for her to evaluate where she was at with her family. What's significant is that she then invited me back into the home to see how things had moved forward, and they'd moved forward immensely. She'd already started to decorate. She'd attended the health appointments with the baby. Baby was signed off from the health visitor, was now thriving well. I think that had we not gone down the route of using the GCP2 tool, things might have spiralled out of proportion for this family. Ultimately, I think it could have ended up with one of the children being physically hurt, and certainly emotionally hurt. Without the training that I've undergone, I would never have had the confidence to carry out a lot of the work that I now do with children and families.
We know that tackling neglect is difficult, but it's not impossible. I've been travelling the country far and wide delivering training on use of the GCP2 tool, and I do that because I've used it myself in practice. I previously used the tool as a social worker, and I've seen the difference that it can make to families, but primarily children, and keeping children safe. It is our drive to get this tool adopted by all partners within social care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. I think that video really kind of summed up.
I think I just had one last slide just about the
Sorry.
training. You know, it's okay. Did I?
No.
No, I didn't. Okay.
No.
If I could just mention
No,
before I let you take it back that we are undertaking GCP2 training virtually. We're looking to be setting up a date for that in November time. The training is open to multi-agency professionals, and we are trying to encourage the use of the tool by multi-agency professionals, and it is currently used across social care and early help, and I am aware that some schools are also trained and using the Grady Care Profile tool as well. Thank you for your time today.
That's great. Thank you, George. And I think it's really, I think the way that video kind of sums it up, and it kind of really complements the way we work with families at an early help level within Walsall, because it's very much about kind of working with rather than doing to kind of tools. So I think that's really important to say as well. Once again, if you do have any questions, please pop them in. We've had a few come through, which we'll talk about at the very end. But we're on to our last presenter today. So in Walsall, we do have Neglect Champions, who are led by Jane Edwards, who is with us today to talk to us about why we have Neglect Champions and what their role is. So Jane, over to you.
Morning all, hope you're well and enjoying the sunshine. Yeah, as Kellyanne said, I'm lead neglect champion. That doesn't mean that my role is more important than anybody else. That just means that I've got more of a coordinating role, and I'm, if you like, the go-between for neglect champions that we've got now, and then hopefully more that we can bring on board. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, purpose of the role of the champion is really it's raising awareness of neglect and everything that's being talked about this morning. And we've got lots of neglect champions throughout the borough, and what we want to do is we want to raise awareness of the priority issue of neglect, and that's within your own team and within any wider organisations that you might come across. We also want to make your organisation aware of any training and support that is available. So anything that we come across, we will make you aware that you may want to sign up to, or you might want to distribute to your teams. And it really is about getting that knowledge and understanding of where to go about neglect as far and wide as we can. We're also looking for a consistent approach across Walsall with regard to the prevention, identification and support of children at risk or experiencing neglect. So that may be that one of the ways that we will do that is that every quarter we will hold a meeting with neglect champions. We'll be brought up to date with any information that you need to know about. any newsletters that you need to know about, any training, so that really we've all got the same knowledge and we're all passing that knowledge out to others. Next slide, please. Okay, so with regard to the current champions, and any future champions that we might have, the kind of support that is being given at the moment is, as you said, it's that conversation, it's talking about it. For example, in my team, we have regular meetings. I have regular meetings with my colleagues. Anything that I'm made aware of with regard to neglect, I put it on the agenda. We discuss it. I pass it out to other organisations. It's really keeping it on the radar, and especially while we've got this awful pandemic going on, you know, it's making people aware that it isn't behind the scenes, and that really is the role of the champion. It's almost like keeping it at the forefront of people's minds. We also circulate newsletters, posters, publicity material, and I know that Ali, in her piece, when she kicked off, showed the neglect poster. Those are the kind of posters that we distribute, and it could be that as a champion you put it in your own workplace, or we've got some champions who are making contact with youth groups, after school clubs, that kind of thing, softball play areas, and they're passing them on as well. So if you do see any of those posters around the borough, it's probably that it has come from a champion who is, you know, really sort of pushing that out. And those posters will tell people where they need to go, the kind of signs they need to look for, where they can signpost with any concerns. Also, any internal communications that you might have. So if you use Twitter or Facebook, if you could put links on there, anything that you can think of with regard to neglect. And then signpost, as I said earlier, signpost your organisation to any partnership training, plus get yourself signed up for it. So as Georgina mentioned, talking about GCP2 training, that is something that I will distribute out to my team. I work in localities and partnerships for Walsall Council, and we link in with the community. So that is something that on my radar, I will think that is something that I need my colleagues to be involved in. And as I mentioned, we have all champions get invited to a quarterly meeting, which I, for want of a better word, chair. And what we also do is we get a trainer, if possible, to each of those neglect meetings. So the last meeting that we held last week, we had a colleague in who did some training on restorative practice. So, and all of that is to really just to help people focused about getting that message out about neglect. And as I said, with regard to the pandemic, it is so important that we keep that on the radar. And those posters are still going out. We're still carrying on meetings. We're still liaising with organisations. We are that real conduit, if you like, that sends that message out. Could I have the next slide, please? So I've just said, and I think this is a really important point, that the value of the champion is not to be underestimated. It really is that link to getting that message out. You know, everything that the speakers have spoken about today, with the role really sort of puts that at the forefront of communities, organisations, and we're trying to constantly expand the role of the neglect champion. We've got a lot of organisations involved across the borough, from voluntary groups to schools, to housing associations, to the council. But really, you can't have too many champions. So great if you're involved now, and I'm sure some of you really are, but if you're sitting there and thinking this organisation, my organisation might not be appropriate, it really, really will be. So I've put my name there, jane.edwards@walsall.gov.uk. If you think that this is something that you could support us with or get involved with, please contact me and I will get straight back to you. Our next meeting is in December, mid-December. Hopefully we'll have another trainer. It's another champions meeting. Anything that we find in the meantime, we will send out to you. But absolutely have a think about it, and if you think it's something you may be interested in, then please get in touch with me, and I will get in touch with you straight away, because your role will be so valuable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you. And I think it's been really beneficial having those neglect champions within Walsall. And like you say, it's things like the posters and getting everything kind of out and about that that really has that effect to the general public. So thank you very much. We are on to our Q&A section now. Just going on whilst Jane's still on, because we did have one thing coming around that about who can actually become neglect champions, Jane. Is it professionals or is it community people that you're looking for?
Anybody. We've contacted the VCSE, we've contacted professionals. What I'd say is if you think that you can spread the word of sort of how to identify or signpost neglect, please contact me, because there really isn't a there isn't a somebody who wouldn't be suitable for that role. It would be anybody really. So if you contact me, and then I will contact you and sort of get you involved, but absolutely anybody. Doesn't matter.
Wonderful. That's wonderful, thank you. And I have popped Jane's information in the chat function as well, if you do know anybody or you yourself want to become a neglect champion. I've popped that in there, so thank you, Jane. So I've just got a few questions that I'm going to come back to some of our presenters on. So the first one is for Joy. You mentioned, Joy, about the single point of contact, so where people can contact for health visitors. Just a quick question around that. Is that open to professionals to be able to make that contact, or is it just for parents?
No, it's for everybody. It's for the local authority usually contact and ask for lateral check. So it's for anyone on night. It's there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. There's always a duty health visitor that's on that's in the hub with a nursery nurse. So yeah, we're there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
And just one quick question, I suppose, from my point of view, if you've got a school, for example, or somebody from early help that wanted to kind of have those conversations, do you require the consent of parents before having those conversations? Yeah. Or is that, so if it's talking specific, but if it's just for advice and guidance, then you just speak to that professional? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Joy, for that.
Thank you very much.
Somebody asked about the slides being forwarded. Yes, they will. I will drop those into an email along with the evaluation form as well. George, one question came through around who can complete a Grady Care Profile 2, or who's the training aimed at?
Anyone really. Once you've had the training, you can undertake the Grady Care Profile 2. Obviously, you probably need to talk within your own organisation whether it's something that you see your organisation adopting and working with, and I'm more than happy to kind of like have follow-up calls with anybody who suspects that might be the case, to talk in a bit more detail about what that could look like for your organisation. But anybody who's had the training can undertake a Grady Care Profile 2 assessment, and there's no rules really from Nspcc around who that can be.
That's lovely, thank you very much. And there was, it wasn't really a question, it was more of a comment really, about the Grady care profile, George, about it was talking about, obviously, once you've completed the assessment, it's really important to make sure that it is then kept under review, as it's easy for it to be done, but then it actually just sits on a shelf. So I suppose the question there is, what is the review process? So once the initial, you've identified that there is neglect and you're working through that sort of action plan with parents and the families, what the review process on that would be?
Well, what we're adopting in early help is we undertake the Grady care through about 4 to kind of 6 home visits. Some of them are unannounced and some of them are announced, because you collect all your evidence via observation, and we usually try and do that within about a 6-week period. We're then looking at a 3-month review period for that, but usually you'd only want 2. You know, your baseline assessment, and then to see if things are improving or not improving. And I do know that you can send your Grady care profile into MASH and things like that as evidence around your need for statutory services. So in a nutshell, it's about 3 months you'd look to review it.
Lovely, thank you for that, George. There is just one more. I know the Grady care would produce the most amounts of questions. One more for you, George, is obviously, because this is a generic tool, so how does it reflect the work that professionals are doing with different age groups or different levels of need? For example, a child who is 12 and has a diagnosis of autism may need something different to a baby of 6 months.
So yeah, within the evidence base of the tool, it does cover all ages. It's a bit more challenging with adolescents, and it is very much about working in partnership with that adolescent, but it does include evidence categories around additional needs and disability. So it kind of gives you it within the tool.
That's wonderful, thank you. I hope that's answered people's questions that they've asked. They are the only questions that we've had through. Obviously, if you have got access to people's emails and you know, or you want to email me if you do think of something afterwards, then please do, and I will make sure that it is directed to the right person after we've received this, after we finish the webinar. So if you can just go on to the next slide for me, Kerry, which is the last slide. So this slide is just showing you there who the website for the Walsall Safeguarding Partnership. There's lots of information on there around neglect and different things that you can access and where to access and different referral forms. There's also the training element as well. So I've just popped two links into the chat function. So with neglect, we do have level 1 and level 2 training. The level 1 is an e-learning course, which is accessible and is free to all people across the partnership, which just gives you the overview of what neglect is. The level 2 training is obviously a little bit more in depth. It talks to you about the signs and symptoms, and it also does go into a little bit about the Grady care profile 2 training as well, and how you can contribute, and also how you can access that training course. That is currently, it's usually done face to face, but we are currently doing that as virtual training, so it's just for a morning. So you can access that through that link there and just book yourself on, and then a link will be sent through to you. And then, as George has already said, around the Grady care profile 2, we are looking at putting one of those on virtually in November as well. So that's it from everybody here today. I'd like to thank all of our presenters today, and a big thank you to Kerry for doing lots of work in the background as well. Hopefully you all walk away knowing something that you didn't already know when you came on board today, a different agency, a different services, and what we have to offer as well. I am just dropping in the chat function now a link to the evaluation form. I will also send this through to you on an email as well, but if you just click on it now, it takes literally 2 minutes just to complete. I know some agencies are having problems. I think it's mainly education, because there must be a block in the system that doesn't allow them to access the Microsoft form. But if you have the capacity to send it through to email it through to yourself, on a mobile phone or something like that, that people are accessing it that way. So we do really encourage you to complete the evaluation form, because we do read them and it really helps us to inform, especially in the climate that we're in today with not able to do face-to-face training. It does help us to support us to know what future webinars you want or how easy it was to access the system. So thank you from all of us today for joining us, and thank you once again to all the presenters who have been with us today. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.